So, in something near and dear to my heart, Tom, it looks like NIST is changing password guidelines. In a new draft with a boring name, NIST is making suggestions about password policies. First and foremost, getting rid of the change password frequently requirement. Now we're getting into supporting longer passwords, longer minimum length, and longer maximum lengths, and providing Unicode options and even guidance on password hints and knowledge based questions. Um, However, as is typical with standards documents, the prompts fall back on things like shall and should variations, which means we may not get everything that we want. Tom, what's NIST's thinking here?
This thinking is that people are really bad at password hygiene, and we've got to do everything we can to make that better. They basically have said, stop using complexity requirements as your barrier to entry, right? And they know that there's a reason for that. Anybody who is well versed in internet's favorite leet speak knows this. Ones and L's become exclamation points, twos become ats, and A's become ats. And you have a password that looks very secure and is about 3 seconds faster to crack because you create basically the equivalencies in your cracking tool. John the Ripper is really good at this stuff. But what they realized is that most people do that for mnemonic reasons, right? Whereas we've known for a really long time that passphrases are much more secure because what they allow us to do is have kind of a cognitive password. For example, if you'll allow me to nerd out for just a second, if you've ever read any books from the Battletech universe, you know that mechs have a startup sequence and they have a check code that is unique to each individual mech warrior. And so they have to speak the phrase in their own tone of voice with their own tone of their own cadence. And if the mech detects that that's not the case, it locks them out. That was a brilliant idea that we came up with in the 80s, because what we realized is that I may know a thing that nobody else knows, right? Think about Captain Marvel. Tell me something that is quirky about you that nobody else knows as a way to prove that you're not a Skrull. But here, we've always had a problem with that. Why? Because you can't put a space in a password. Well, NIST is saying now all printable ASCII characters should be allowed to be valid password characters, including the space, because we shouldn't be delimiting passwords with spaces anymore, because we should be hashing them and checking the hash value to determine if they're valid. Also, Unicode characters that only take up one character. That was one of the other big problems we had. Unicode is bigger. It's more bits per storage character, so passwords are growing out of whatever. I also like the fact that the password hint should not be given to an unauthenticated user in plain text. Like, that's a biggie, right? Like, don't let people guess your password hints. Also, knowledge-based questions. We've got to come up with better ways to do that, because I can find out what the first make and model of your car was. I can find out what street you lived on as a kid. Hell, there are Facebook like memes dedicated to that, right? I much prefer the was it the nihilistic version? You know, when was the first year that you finally gave up hope? Because as it's joking as it sounds, that's actually not something that you can Google. But again, kind of like you mentioned, any standards document is going to run into one big problem. What should you do versus what do you have to do? I am a huge, don't put shall, put should. And if you look down this document, there's a lot of shoulds that are like the bare minimum, right? Like, you shall offer a password up to 64 characters in length. You should require 8. There's a big difference between those two. So I think hopefully with NIST putting these policies out here and kind of driving forward with what we need to do, I hope that a lot of companies are going to adopt them. But more importantly, just like any way to get this done, I hope that NIST requires anybody doing business with the US federal government to adopt these and require certain minimums. I mean, that's how we've driven IPv6 adoption for the last couple of years, is that you basically have to have it if you want to do business with the government, because there's no better way to enforce a rule than to make it a rule. So good luck to the folks at NIST, and, keep on passwording.